Welcome to the Unlocking the Club podcast, where we host honest and direct conversations about journeys of access, personal truth, and reclaiming space. We share our truth so that you can find the key to own your truth, honor your journey, and reclaim your space. Grab your keys, your wallet, your phone, and invite your friends to meet you at the club. Here's your host, Angela Taylor.
Hey folks, I'm Angela Taylor, your host for Unlocking the Club. And today we're going to unlock the club by demystifying the justice system from the lens of a judge who happens to be a Black female who's been in the justice system from a few different capacities for several years. And we'll get some insight from her. But before that, I actually want to talk a little bit about my participation, if you will, in the justice system. I've had some really interesting interactions in the justice system that really have been etched in my mind as I look at unlocking the club. It's a really intimidating process, a really intimidating system. And I got to know it pretty early when I was a college sophomore. And but I can look back now at something that was kind of funny, but in the moment it wasn't so much so. So when I was at Stanford, we had some scooters. And I would be riding the scooters around campus with some of my teammates from time to time. And there were some areas that were off limits to scooters, but it was easier to get from point A to point B with a straight line versus going all the way around campus. So we decided sometimes to cut through campus. Well, one particular time, there was an officer who saw me cutting through campus, pulled me over and gave me a ticket. When I had that ticket, I had to show up in court about a month and a half later. And I had never been ordered to court before. I didn't know what to do. Had gotten some advice from one of my assistant coaches on the women's basketball team about what to do, what to say. I was guilty as charged. I was literally riding through the middle of campus. There was no way I was going to get out of this. And as I'm standing before the judge and he calls me, he looks at me for a second and he says, "I need you to approach the bench." And in that moment, my heart was sinking. I didn't know what was going to happen. I'm embarrassed to a certain extent, right? I'm not a high profile student athlete, but I was a student athlete representing the Stanford women's basketball team at the time. And as I approached the bench, I was just worried that, again, he was going to put me in handcuffs, send me to jail. I didn't know what was going to happen. And he looks at me and he says, "I think you were my daughter's coach at basketball camp last summer. Look, you're not supposed to be doing this. I'm going to let you off the hook this time, but make sure you don't do it again." Again, in that moment, recognizing that who you know really matters was my first taste of the justice system, right? A system that, again, is really intimidating. My second taste was when I was in New York City and I was called for jury duty. And I was sitting in the jury waiting area, waiting to get called. I was looking around at everybody else from New York City that was to my left and the right in the room. And I recognize, first and foremost, if I was a teacher or a parent and my kid was in 8th or 9th grade, I would actually have them join me in the jury box. Because if you see who a jury of your peers really is, you may choose to make some different choices in those moments where you can find yourself in trouble. So again, it's one of those systems and those structures that we all, since the beginning of time, have heard about. But unless you've had an encounter in the justice system, it's this mythological thing. And I think what we've seen over the last couple of years, it could be a really intimidating space, particularly for those of us who are in the historically excluded or marginalized identities, because oftentimes you don't have somebody on the bench as a judge who looks like you, who may understand your lived experience, who may give you the benefit of the doubt in certain cases. And so that's why we really want to have this conversation. Excited about today's discussion with our special guest, the Honorable Monica F. Wiley, who I want to know not just the work that she does, but who she is inside of the journey that she's had to take to getting to the place that she is now, where she's actually a judge in San Francisco. So we're going to unlock the club today. Thanks for joining us. Here's a little bit more about the Honorable Monica F. Wiley. On today's episode of Unlocking the Club, I am thrilled to be in conversation with the Honorable Monica F. Wiley. Wiley was appointed to the San Francisco Superior Court bench on September 1st, 2009 by Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger and is the second African-American female judge appointed to the San Francisco bench. During her tenure with the San Francisco Superior Court, Judge Wiley has presided in the civil, criminal, family, delinquency, and dependency departments in both trial and calendar courtrooms. Judge Wiley is a member of the 2021 to 2023 Judicial College Steering Committee, a member of the faculty for the California Center for Judicial Education for New Judges Orientation, and a faculty member for the B.E. Whitkin Judicial College, and is an adjunct professor at UC Hastings College of the Law. Judge Wiley currently serves as a task force member on statewide committees focused on civility and the elimination of bias in the legal profession, and on the advisory committee of Central Legal de la Raza's Youth Law Academy. Judge Wiley earned her JD cum laude from Howard University School of Law. She received her bachelor's degree in political economies of industrial societies from the University of California at Berkeley, and was a 4-year letter winner as a member of the Cal women's basketball team. Thanks for tuning in as we unlock the club with our guest, the Honorable Monica F. Wiley. Monica, hello. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm great, and thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Are you excited to be here? Well, this is a rare occasion where we have like Stanford Cardinal and Cal like right in the same space and on the same team. So it's an honor to be in this space with the Cal Bear today.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, as we just heard your amazing bio, you've obviously had an amazing career in the legal system. I'm curious, not just the work that you've done over the years, but who you've been inside of that legal system as a Black woman navigating this space, which seems to me from the outside looking in as predominantly white male, right? And a space that is a club that we aren't always welcome into. What has your experience been like, and what is important to you in the role and capacity that you have?
Well, just kind of by way of context, I was appointed by Arnold Schwarzenegger in 2009, September 1st, 2009. And I was the second African-American female appointed to the bench in San Francisco. So in the 160 plus year history of the San Francisco Superior Court bench, we'd only had 2 African-American women actually appointed to the bench. We now, in 2022, have a third. So the first actually was elevated to the Court of Appeal. So we really only have, again, 2 in San Francisco. So when you say that there is kind of an exclusive club in terms of diversity in the judiciary, I think that really is a kind of, in San Francisco, a microcosm really of nationally kind of what the trends are. When I became a judge in 2009, there was no one, only one person who really looked like me. She became my mentor judge. She's been someone who I have looked, up to and modeled my career after. But walking into any room and how is this different from college or law school or any other real professional walk, where you walk into a room and you might be the only African-American, you might be the only African-American woman. And you've kind of layered all of that with, I was appointed at 39. So I'm the youngest member of my court. I'm the second African-American female, and I'm only, again, someone who it's very rarefied air that I was a part of initially.
Which is just mind-blowing considering, you're operating in San Francisco, in California, and what we all think of the progressive state where there's a lot of diversity. We think about the landscape across the country and what the numbers must look like. I'm here in Idaho, in any other place. And for you, what was the sense that you had? I talk about this quite a bit with our guests. Society has this way of pigeonholing Black women into the roles that we can and should have, and those that are off limits to us. What gave you the audacity to think that this was a path that you could take or wanted to even endeavor to take?
Dr. Shirley Wiley. So my mom was a career educator. She spent over 35 years in education, and she had 2 daughters. And she told us when my sister's 2 years older than I am, she told us when we were about, I think, 10 and 12, one of you is going to be a doctor and one of you is going to be a lawyer. And I don't care who's who or what's what. So I was terrible in math. And so I quickly signed up for the lawyer card. My sister signed up for the doctor card. So she's a doctor. She practices in Fresno. I was an attorney and was fortunate enough to become a judge. But it never was in my family. It never was, are you going to finish high school? Are you going to finish college? It's what college are you going to? And then after that, it's what graduate school are you going to? What, professional degree are you going to obtain? And so when you say the audacity, I had no choice. My mother was there pushing, pulling all the way along my career. And so, I was fortunate. I just listened to her. And when she told me, to work harder, I worked harder.
Yeah. So we need a Shirley Wiley in all of our lives, right? Someone who speak it into existence and make it happen, right? She said, you're going to be either a doctor or a lawyer. And she has a daughter that's a doctor and a daughter that's a lawyer. That's pretty amazing, and can only imagine how amazing she was to have been a doctor, in her generation.
Well, she got her educational doctorate when my sister and I were in our late teens. And, thinking about that now, having two daughters, a husband, and going back to school, because she had to go, back to school to pick up a lot of credits so that she could get her educational doctorate. It took a lot of perseverance. And there's a picture that my sister and I have on the day of her graduation when she received her doctorate. And it says, "We want to be doctors just like my mom." And so I think, when you have that kind of a role model, as I said, you really don't have a choice. You're going to hopefully achieve very good things in life.
You remind me, a few weeks ago, I had the pleasure of going to the National Museum of African American History in DC. And if you haven't been, it's incredible. And don't just spend a day, right? You're probably going to need to be there several days just to take in all the information, some of it overwhelming, some of it inspiring and motivating. And one of the things and threads that really resonated with me was all of these women, who were juggling so many different things, were the caretaker for their family, whether it was their spouses or their children or whoever else, was in their family, was working a full-time job and having to try to do things to live into what their dreams and their vision was. And I think that is what I'm hearing from you, and what your mother implanted in you all, and that you were able to witness firsthand as she was navigating her own journey to getting a doctorate. I'm curious, is that a burden that, Black women, that you feel that we have to be exceptional because others are watching?
I think it goes without saying. I think that, when we, as African-American women, we have such an incredible legacy that when you talk about, what others achieved earlier, before the Civil Rights Movement in the late 19th century, all of that, layered with what they had to face. They had to face Jim Crow law. They had to face, segregation. They had to find the pockets of, exceptionalism where they could, and then build upon it. What is the biggest concern I have today? I hope I don't drive my Tesla too far that I'm not able to charge before I get home. So when you think about all of that, it's incredible what they achieved. It's incredible, I think, how they were able to model and role model success for their children. And, hopefully that's the legacy that continues to, to perpetrate and continues to happen in the African-American community, because, we come from a really strong line of people. And when I went to the African-American Museum, one of the things that I kept thinking as I was going through the exhibits was, it's amazing we've achieved everything that we've achieved. Absolutely. With all of the oppression, with everything that we had to deal with and combat, throughout history. Look at what we've done. Can we and should we have even greater achievements? Of course. But where we are now, I think, is certainly just an absolute credit to the people whose legacies and whose shoulders that we've stood on.
Which is a really important perspective to have, because the system would have you thinking that you aren't capable, right? The system wants you to get frustrated and overwhelmed and to stop, right? The system wanted you not to hear your mother, put this dream out there. And the first obstacle that you met, for Monica to stop and say, you know what, maybe this isn't what I'm capable of doing. And yet and still, right?
Imposter syndrome, right? We all have imposter syndrome.
Yes.
And, I've had imposter syndrome throughout, points of my career. And I've always said this, I heard this a long time ago, and it just resonates with me, grant me the confidence of a mediocre white man. Because if I had the confidence of a mediocre white man, I'd be the Queen of England.
In a moment. Yes.
So that everyone has that, and we go through those periods of time. And I think that's when you're talking about networking and seeing people who look like you, who've achieved certain things, and making sure that you have that representation, those role models, that mentorship. Because that's the time where you can go to your mentor and you can say, I'm not sure I can get this done. I'm not sure I can do this. And that person is going to pull you up. And that person is going to say, of course you can. I did it. You can do it. How can I help you? What can we do to make sure that you're not going to self-defeat because of imposter syndrome? And so that's why networking, mentorship is so important, for our community.
It is. And speaking of, right, the confidence of a mediocre white man, when you said that, it took me back to the recent confirmation hearings for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, who I know for me, I watched wall-to-wall coverage 2 o'clock in the morning if I couldn't see it during the course of the day or later. And it was both inspiring and overwhelming. I was proud and pissed off at the same time, right? And in those hearings, as I heard mediocre folks across the days questioning her capability of being on the Supreme Court. And I get curious, I know how I felt as someone, a layperson who hasn't done all the things that you've done in the justice system. I wonder from your perspective, as someone who has earned her place in the court, what it felt like to watch that transpire.
I was able to watch a lot of the hearings, and one, I give her all of the credit in the world. I would have been across the table, in somebody's face, probably about 30 seconds into that. She kept her composure. And I think that everything that she had experienced before in life had brought her to that moment. Obviously, President Biden made a fantastic choice. And it reminded me, a good friend of mine was very recently confirmed also to the federal court bench. And she told me about an opportunity that she had to do some judicial training. And so she went to the judicial training, and there was another judge from Kentucky. And so he asked her, as they started their conversation, what law school did you go to?
Oh,
and
a dreaded question.
A dreaded question. And she said, why does it matter? Because to her, we're both sitting in this room. We're both recently appointed Article 3, Section 2 judges, which is a judicial appointment for life. Does it matter that I went to Yale? Where did you go?
Exactly.
And so I think that, when I watched the hearings, you had a lot of people who didn't have nearly the credentials that she had. And in fact, if you look very objectively at her credentials, at her work experience, she is the most qualified Supreme Court justice that we have, having had a tremendous amount of trial experience, which none of the other justices have had in the recent past. So I think that, we get into this, she was the first African-American on the United States Supreme Court. She's the most qualified Supreme Court justice that we've had in a long time. And so I give her a tremendous amount of credit. I think that, obviously her family is just extremely proud of her. Her friends are extremely proud of her. And anyone who's known her is extremely proud. And I think a lot of people will say, I knew she was going to be destined for great things. And I'm sure that's true, because I think that the way she handled those hearings indicated really the strength of character that she has.
No, that is so true. And the truth of the matter is the other candidates that were being vetted for the nomination were also very qualified, right? Double Ivies, whatever the credentials that you were looking for. And yet and still the question was, are we sacrificing quality to fit this idealistic viewpoint that the Democrats have, which is really, I think, what we hear quite often, whether it's in the corporate space, and I'm sure in the courtroom, is did you earn your opportunity? Have you ever had that sense, whether someone said it to you or you felt that people are kind of looking to see, like, did the Honorable Monica F. Wiley earn her seat on the bench?
Well, I was 39 when I was appointed, and so I came in. I was appointed the same day as a group of other. There were 5 of us appointed the same day. 4 were men. I was the only woman. Wow. I was the youngest, and so I think that there immediately was a why her, and so with that comes, well, obviously, they're pushing diversity. It's a diverse selection, and so that's why she's there. Forget the fact that I had more jury trial experience than the other 4 that were not, that were appointed that day. Forget the fact that the richness of both federal and state practice that I had. Let's put all of that aside. So yes, you come into it with, I have a chip on my shoulder, and as a competitive athlete, I'm going to outwork you. I'm going to out-prepare you. If I get a chance, I'm going to stomp you into the ground. So with that, I think comes you can transfer that into being the best judge that I could be. When I first started, there was, if there was a duty judge, if someone needed a 24-hour, not an hour, I'm on that phone, talking to police officers, my hand was up to do it. If there was, hey, we need someone to take this trial, my hand was up to do it. And I just, I think hopefully, by the end of my first year, certainly I had proven, that I was going to be an asset. I might only be 39 years old, but I was going to be an asset to this organization. And so I think that you have to prove yourself out of that, right? You have to prove yourself again and again, every day, every minute of every day, that you are where you belong, you've earned your spot, and you're going to make the most of your opportunity.
I think one of the reasons why having participated in athletics is of tremendous benefits wherever your career takes you is because of what you just pointed out, of the capacity and the understanding to be in a space where there's that positive self-talk that happens. Right, that this is what I am capable of doing. And even in those moments or instances where you don't succeed or you make a mistake, right, you can recover and it doesn't devastate you. Like, what has being an athlete embedded in you that has had you be successful as a judge and in the legal system?
I think it's this, the same skill set that you're developing as an athlete: time management, preparation, attention to detail, stamina, perseverance, really just being able to focus. I have a task, I have a job, and I'm going to focus on it. And I'm going to compare myself, not necessarily to my competition, but to what I know my personal ability is. And I think that in doing that, you're really, really able, particularly in an adversarial process like litigation, I think you're able to, I'm not going to play up to my competition or down to my competition. I'm going to play the game that I know how to play. And if you work hard enough, you train long enough, you train hard enough, then your best is generally going to be better than others. So I think that's kind of all of those skills, all of that kind of mindset that I developed over the years. I think I brought that certainly into being a litigator because that's by nature a very adversarial process. So then when you become a judge, you don't have that kind of adversarial process mindset. Instead, you're protecting the process. You are the face of the justice system. Some people who come to your courtroom, you're the only judge, judicial officer that they're going to be able to interact with. Sometimes in their entire lives, they may just set foot in one courtroom. So if that's what's going to happen, then you want to make sure that you're fair, that you're neutral, that you've listened, that you've ruled impartially and objectively, and that they understand even if you rule against them, even if I don't necessarily see the facts the way that you see the facts, and I don't apply the law the way you think that I should apply the law, they still feel that they have some part of the process that they feel that they have been able to have their day in court and that the process was fair because the judge was fair. And so I think those are kind of my goals each and every day. And I think that helps tremendously in terms of I like to think of it as the consumer's experience with the court system.
Well, you spoke about Governor Schwarzenegger nominated you for the courts when you were 39. So you probably roughly had about 12 to 15 years as a litigator, I imagine, in between coming out of law school. And I get curious of what young Monica was like as you were trying to navigate your way up the ladder. And I say this because I mentioned in the opening the experience I had in the New York City jury system. And the case that I did receive, it was a drug case, and the defendant couldn't afford his own representation, right? So it was a court-appointed attorney. And I remember people that were on the jury with me who didn't look like either the defendant or the court-appointed attorney were making a decision based on things that had nothing to do with the evidence, right? And so the attorney showed up late one day in court. Her hair was falling out of her ponytail. She was a Black woman. And they were like, he can't even afford an attorney that is going to get here on time and represent him. He has to be guilty. Like, and I'm like, wait a minute. Like, that has nothing to do with the case at hand or the evidence that we're hearing. Did you experience how you showed up in the courtroom impacting, right, outcomes?
Well, I think for me, I think in terms of how I wanted to present myself, I wanted to be, I always wanted to be professional. And in fact, in a little bit of genderism, I never wore pants. When I was in, for the 12 years that I was a litigator, I did not wear pants to court one day.
Wow. So it was a skirt suit, right? That you saw in the 90s and 2000s, yeah?
It was a skirt suit and a very muted colored skirt suit. But, there's so much that goes into it because, as the attorney, you realize the jury is going to look at you, that you're there advocating on behalf of your client. You are attempting to be as persuasive as you can. And I think that, that's a heavy burden. And honestly, that's one of the reasons why I shied away from criminal litigation when I was younger, because that type of pressure, and you have someone's liberty in your hands. And I as a young attorney, I did not want to do that. I wanted to do civil litigation. If I lost someone's money, it was money and it could be replaced.
Right.
Versus someone's personal liberty, and knowing as an African American woman that the system wasn't fair. You can try a criminal trial 10 different times to 10 different juries, and you're going to have probably a number of different results. And when it comes to sentencing, if you have 10 different judges, you may have 10 different sentences.
Yeah.
So the arbitrariness of the process, to me, I had some difficulty with when I was a young attorney. And so I think that, your experience that you spoke of, I think it was your first case of the criminal justice system on that scooter. That knowing someone, knowing what the process is, knowing that, pretrial diversion, it's a minor offense. If your attorney knows the DA and they have a good working relationship, the PD goes to the DA, and your first appearance, you may get diversion right away. You might get a felony reduced to a misdemeanor. That misdemeanor can then be expunged after a period of time. So knowing that process, I think, is important. Knowing and just having information, and that's what I think. There are a lot of things wrong, obviously, with the criminal justice system. There's systemic racism, there's implicit bias, there's unconscious bias, all of that. But just having information to be able to make informed and intelligent decisions about the process and what you should do, that's what's powerful. That's where, a lot of people, I think, sometimes they think, well, I need that private attorney. I need that $750 an hour attorney.
Yeah.
There are some exceptional public defenders that private $750 an hour attorney, they don't go to court. A public defender is in court every single day. Mm-hmm. They know the DA, they know the judge, they know the police officers, they know all the players. So I get in trouble. I probably can't, unfortunately, I won't qualify for a public defender, but I would rather go to a public defender because they know what they're doing versus someone who doesn't do criminal law and doesn't step in court every single day.
Well, Monica, I get curious as you're talking about the criminal justice system of the parallels, if any, between like the corporate space and the criminal justice system. And you spoke earlier about the lessons that you learned from your mother, right? Is put your head down, work hard, get good grades, and the rest, right? Continue that throughout your career. And I think that's what many of us hear, right, from our Black parents is, look, don't let them see you sweat, put your head down, work as hard as you can, get good grades, get an education, and then get a good job. And what we don't hear is about the social capital that is needed, right? Of the relationships that are needed to, after you get to a certain level inside of any system, what pulls you through is relationships and trust that is built with those influencers and decision makers inside of organizations. And I didn't know that until well into my career. Is that similar in the club that you are now navigating? Is there another club? It feels like from the outside looking in that, the Honorable Monica F. Wiley, you are in the club. Is there another level to the club in the criminal justice system?
There are always levels, right? There are always levels to clubs. And, the real decision makers, people think judges have a lot of power. We don't have all of the power in the criminal justice system. That stems from the charging documents and the charging officials, and that's the district attorney. Who your district attorney is, if you want to talk about criminal justice reform, sentencing reform, bail reform, you're looking at who the district attorney is, because that's the person who can make all of those things happen. The judges, we are just reacting to what the charges are, what the counts are in the indictment or in the complaint in front of us. And if a jury convicts, what does the sentencing guidelines then say? What's the low, mid, and high term? We have some discretion with respect to that, but if you're never charged with that, petty theft over, $950, then we don't have an opportunity to then deal with that case. So that's the club within the club. Is really, I think, the district attorney's office, who's in charge of the district attorney's office, and how they are looking at criminal law and criminal justice reform.
Which is a really important passcode, right? Oftentimes when we're looking at our election cycles, we look at the top of the ballot and we wait till the presidential elections to get involved. But when we look at our local politics, where the district attorneys, the secretary of state, and all of these different roles that do impact outcomes, when they are being elected and where we need more representation, we aren't as consistent of participants in those conversations. And I think that is another place that we can unlock the club, is exactly where you're pointing us to, is understanding all the dynamics inside of the system.
I think local politics are so undervalued. And not just, the DA's race or, who's going to be the public defender, but who's going to be on your school board? Who is going to be making the decisions for your children in terms of, sometimes curriculum, sometimes, different things that involve their day-to-day experience in the educational system. Those are to me, just as important elections as, who's going to be the DA, who's going to be your junior senator from the state of California, who's going to be your governor, because that's really where I think a lot of impact starts, at the very, very local level, because that's our day-to-day. That's, how we experience life in our communities are on that very, very local level. So yes, pay attention, be informed in terms of your local politics as well.
Such a great point. I get curious too, you've been really intentional about your journey, right? And really diligent throughout the process. Was there a time where you thought, this is not for me? Where there was, right, you thought you had the door open and, it was blocked, there was a gatekeeper that wasn't letting you in? If so, how did you overcome that?
So I can't remember a time other than, so when I was first applying for law schools, my sister, who 2 years older, she's the doctor, she told me, you played a sport in college, you had a 3.5 at Cal, you can go anywhere. So I applied to Stanford, Harvard, Yale, Berkeley, and Georgetown. I got waitlisted at Georgetown. Everyone else said no, including Stanford, but all for the better. So
it's another story, right?
It's another story. But so there I was, with a specific goal in mind, right? I wanted to go to law school, and I had been essentially, my arm had been twisted by my mother. You're going to law school. So when when I was rejected from the various law schools, I said, maybe I wait a year. Maybe I retake the LSAT. Maybe I wait a year, work for a year, recalibrate a bit. And my mom, knowing my personality, said, no, we will go to the latest, and Howard, the latest deadline in the entire continental US of A in 1995 for the law school admissions. And we applied, and I got in. And what was interesting about that particular journey was that in retrospect, Howard was the best school for me. I may have gotten lost, in a school with more people that had a lot less diversity. And I felt going, away from home for the first time, going to Washington, D.C., being part of that community that was extremely nurturing, was, for my personality, and I was a 22-year-old right out of college. That was perfect for me. That was perfect for me. I found another identity, if you will, in Washington, D.C. And so I now embrace the everything works out for a reason, because of course, back in, February, March of the year that I graduated, I was devastated that I hadn't gotten into the top 5 schools that I wanted to get into. And, as I now believe in the universe. I now believe everything really does work out the way it's supposed to work out. And so I had a fantastic 3 years at Howard. It was, friendships and relationships that I still have to this day. The former mayor of Atlanta was in my class, Kasim Reed. I've got a couple other, people that have gone on to do some incredible things from that class. And I think that it was well worthwhile, for me to have that experience, because that not getting into the schools that I wanted to get into was the first time I lost something. I hadn't been, top 5% of my class. I hadn't gotten, the most valuable player or whatever it was. Yeah. And it took a lot of, for me, internal self-reflection to kind of, pick myself up and say, okay, we can still make this happen, right? We can still go to law school. We can still, do well. We can still graduate with honors. We can still go back to California and do what we want to do.
Well, and there's an important lesson there in what you said, because so often, we're faced with an obstacle. We don't get what we want, and we stop, and we think that, okay, well, it's not meant to be, right? It's not ordained, and we may choose another path. Instead, you leaned in, right? Completely. You still knew what your vision was going to be. You may get a different path to that vision, but you were able to lean in. But it feels like, Monica, that you have people in your life that can provide that great context. And I think often what happens for Black women, as you are climbing the ladder and you become one of the very few people at that stage in your evolution, you don't have a lot of people in your life, your family, who have similar lived experiences that you can bounce things off of and give you that suggestion.
And that's why I say you find it, right? That's why I say you seek out your mentor. Your mentor doesn't have to and I strongly believe this, your mentor does not have to look like you.
Yes.
They do not have to be a Black female. They can be, in fact, when I look back, I had at a law firm that I worked at, one of the most impactful partners that I worked with that summer looked nothing like me. He was a 72-year-old white man, and yet he was so invested in me and my success, and that's all you want. Yeah. Whatever that mentor package looks like, you want that person to be as invested in your success as you are. And that can be any package. I don't care who it is. I don't care what it looks like.
Yes.
I want that person to care about me and my success. And so, looking for those people, and sometimes you can't wait for that person to kind of notice you and say, hey, let's go get dinner. Let's go get lunch. You need to be proactive. You need to say to that person, I would love to sit down with you, coffee, lunch, even a phone call, and talk about you and your journey, and talk about me, where I am, and what things I maybe need to do. Because I don't have that in my family. I don't have someone I know that can provide me that crucial information or that crucial advice. And so you've got to find it.
really important perspective, right? That's the social capital. And it's not always going to work in the opposite direction where somebody sees you in the hallway and is saying, hey, that's somebody I want to get to know. You may have to be proactive in finding that person yourself. We had, when I was at the WNBA League office, we had an event called Inspiring Women Luncheon. And one of our first speakers was Madeleine Albright, who I know passed away recently. And she was taking questions from the audience, and somebody asked, like, who was one of your, most favorite female mentors? And she was like, and she had like a witty sense of humor. And she's like, I got to tell you the truth. Like, women were my nemesis quite often. We got in each other's way because there was a sense of it's either you or me, right? So it was a zero-sum game. And some of my strongest mentors and advocates were white men. And so when you found that 72-year-old colleague who became the person that was connecting with you, was sponsoring you probably in different circumstances, it was a really brilliant way to build that bridge and to allow him to get to know who you were by proactively reaching out to him. I think it's really
And as I said, you can't wait. Don't wait. You need to be proactive. But two, again, and I can't emphasize this enough, because we want to, we walk into a room, you see that other person that looks like you do the head nod, and that person may not head nod you back. And it's like, wait, come on, brother, what's up? And you need to find the people. Again, the people are going to be in your corner. They may not look like you, but that's who you got. You sometimes, as they say, you can't pick your family, and some people will be your family, and you need to be open to that.
Well, Monica, what's next for you? Like, right, as you are here in this amazing position, like, what is something that you want to create for yourself?
I often wonder, because I'm extremely happy what I'm doing. I right now I am supervising in our family department, and I do a little bit of everything. I do family, I do juvenile justice, I do dependency. I get to teach statewide. I have a great autonomy. I've gotten to the point where I'm going to get everybody knows I'm going to get my job done. I'll do it well. And I just have a lot of autonomy. And so what's next? I'd like to be the presiding judge in San Francisco. That's something that's voted on by your peers. So there are 52 of us. I need 51 votes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Well, not 51 votes, but the majority. But I would like to do that. I've always said no, never to the Court of Appeal. I'm kind of rethinking that a little bit. Maybe I'll apply for elevation. But I'm still fairly young at 52, and so there are a lot of things that I think I still want to do. In fact, really, maybe one day even going back to litigation. Because it's hard sometimes to watch in court. In my first year, I had a jury trial assignment, and I had to train myself out of every time I would hear a question that should be objected to, I'd have to train myself out of looking, to the other side, like, you're going to object to that because that's speculation. That calls for speculation. So I would have to train myself not to do that. I love litigation. I've loved basketball in my life as a sport, but I think I loved litigation more. And so I could see myself eventually going back and doing some kind of litigation.
Interesting. It's like when chefs, right? When chefs become executive chefs, they actually are further away from the thing that they're passionate about, and that's actually cooking, right? They're now ordering linens and ordering the inventory and all those different things, and they're not actually in the kitchen cooking. So the further up the ladder you get, the further from the thing that enticed you into this profession sometimes occurs. I'm curious, Monica, for you, when we look at what you've accomplished and the intensity of the job that you have, the responsibility, I get curious about wellness in the workplace. Like, how do you take care of self in this really stressful atmosphere? At least from the outside looking in, it feels like it must be stressful.
So my first, and I've had 2 stints now in family law, and I really found my passion in family law. My background was civil litigation, but I think I found passion as a judge in my family law assignments. And the first go around here, I would take everything home. I would agonize over every single decision. I would bring families back for review hearings. I had one couple that was a very, very young couple, 5 kids, young African-American couple. We had a weekly session with them.
Wow.
They would come in 3 o'clock on Thursdays, every Thursday, 3 o'clock. And literally it was just how you doing? How'd you do this week?
Mhm.
And in my family law assignment, I find that you have to be a little bit of a social worker, a little bit of a therapist, a little bit of a judge, right? Because ultimately I'm going to make a decision and issue an order. And the expectation is that you comply with that order. But there's so many different facets to what you're doing. And so I really found a passion in family law. And so I went to criminal court after my first stint. And there it was so different. It was, adults making adult decisions, and sometimes there are consequences, and sometimes you had to go to state prison for a period of time. And the dispassionate way in which that whole process happens. It's like almost like a well choreographed, or sometimes not a well choreographed dance between the DA's office, the PD's office, and the judges. It was interesting. I came back to family and I was able to pull back. And it was almost like a light bulb, because I realized that I didn't make the facts. I'm trying to help the parties, help the family. And so I don't need to take it home every night. I don't need to agonize over every decision. I need to make a decision and move on. Mm-hmm. And so that really helped. I think I added years to my life, literally, by having that different experience. And so now I was telling you about a bike trip that I have planned for next year. It is a cross-country bike trip. I used to play a lot of sports. After college, I still played recreationally. I played basketball. I got into some flag football, which was awesome. I like the high impact stuff, ultimate frisbee.
Right.
And then I had a hip replacement when I was 44 because
you're doing all of that.
I'm doing all that, and I had no cartilage. And so that kind of slowed me down a bit. But the cycling that's new is fairly new. The cycling is kind of, I think, a little tiny bit of substitute for that. So I did a 30-mile ride yesterday, and I'm like not waiting for red light. I know this is bad, but it somehow makes it even more exciting if you just don't wait for the red lights and you try to go around the cars. But I think that you have to find, obviously, in whatever you're doing, you have to find that outlet. You have to find that way to wind down. I don't drink, which a lot of people, sometimes, have an evening cocktail or something. So I don't drink. I don't have any other vices, so to speak. So, it has to be some kind of an athletic outlet for me.
Well, and I sense that there's no in between, right? It's either you're not doing it or you're going to do it exceptionally well and a cross-country bike trip.
Yeah. What is it? 52 days on a bike. Yes, that does sound crazy. The more I say it, the more crazier it sounds, although I put my deposit down. So
you're locked in at this point. And it's out in the universe, the Unlocking the Club community. We will be here to support you along the way. We'll be cheering you on. You'll have to, check in with us when you start that. So when are you planning to do this?
So this is March 2023.
Okay.
It's going to start, I want to say March 9th. And it'll be 52 straight days, and then I'm only going to be gone, like 38 days from work or something like that. So it'll be the longest, definitely the longest, time off the bench that I have taken. And I'm really looking forward to it. I'm a little scared. I will be, quite honest. But it's a supported trip, so I've already told the organizer I'll be in the van more than you will, and I feel like I should be paid for driving the van. But it's pretty. We have off days and spa days, and so I should, knock on wood, I'll make it.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure what your experience was like in COVID the last 2 years, right? And the criminal justice system, like if you were in the courtroom, if you're interacting with people or not, but it feels like that is the remedy for what has happened over the last 2 years, is to be able to get on a bike and see this country. It's a beautiful country. Hopefully you'll head through Idaho. All right, let me know if you head this way through Idaho. But I think it's fantastic. Like as soon as you said it, you had me thinking, wait a minute, what's something like that? To find that competitive edge, an excuse and a reason to actually work out and be in great shape again.
Easy on the joints, and you look really good in those bike clothes.
Is that what it is? Okay, so like you check, all of those different things. Well,
That's
and
what it is.
hopefully whoever is in the van knows how to fix the tires.
They do.
Because I think that's the biggest issue.
I actually know how to fix a tire now. I took a class. It's something when you think about like all of the different things really that you can do. As I said, that's like longevity when you're talking about golfing. I never got into golfing, but something that you can do forever. Until you're 80 years old, you can golf. And so cycling is kind of one of those things. So I think, and it sounds, I kind of started to pick it up a little earlier this year, but I think I really wanted to pick it up during COVID. But you couldn't find a bike in COVID because everybody had a bike in COVID. And so I think I delayed it a couple of years, but I'm really looking forward to embracing it.
That's great. Well, Monica, you are someone as a peer in your peer group that I admire and am inspired by all the things that you're doing. And undoubtedly there's, a 10, 11-year-old girl that somehow comes across your photo that says the Honorable Monica F. Wiley, and she asks her parents, like, what does that mean? And what is she doing? And now all of a sudden she wants to pursue a similar career. What would you tell that 10 or 11-year-old girl or the 24-year-old law school graduate about the journey that's ahead?
I would tell them, there might be obstacles. Everybody has obstacles. You might fail your first try, but there is a law school for everyone in this country. If you want to go to school, you will graduate. You will pass a bar wherever you are. If you remember to stay prepared, work as hard as you can, and just really understand that there are people and allies that you will have that you don't even know you have. So you need to reach out, make sure you are letting people help you. Don't be afraid to ask for help, and let people help you when they can.
Yeah, and fail. Fail means that you're trying to do something. And I think what I'm hearing from you is being an athlete, planning this cross-country bike race or bike ride, right? If you learn so much by just trying and doing, and you don't have to do it perfectly the first time, but you get better and you learn more about yourself and about different things. And so I think that's sage advice and really appreciate it. Monica, if you have a few more minutes, would love to take a quick little break and then bring you back for the back nine, where we throw you through a little bit of rapid fire questions here on the hot seat so we can get to know you a little bit better. You up for it?
Okay, I am.
All right, we'll be right back with the Honorable Monica F. Wiley right after this break. So, Monica, I imagine you're a voracious reader or consuming podcasts. What are some of the things that you consume in your free time to continue learning?
Nothing. Netflix is the devil, and it has taken me and it has made me its henchman. No, I do watch way too much TV. During COVID, the Dallas, you remember the original Dallas, 1970? Yes. I went through 14 seasons of Dallas, 30 episodes per season.
Nice, JR, Pamela, Bobby, all of them.
All of it. But I do read a lot as well. And so yeah, that's my dirty secret.
Well, after you cross the country on your bike, what's the next thing on your bucket list?
That is a great question. I think I'm going to focus on being successful cross country. Okay. If I do that, then I think I would like to take a trip to either France or Spain and do a bike trip there.
Oh, that'd be amazing. So besides your home where you're watching Netflix, where's another place that you feel the safest?
Oddly enough, on my bench. On my bench, I have a lot because I have so much control there.
Interesting. I love that. Wouldn't have expected you to say that. Tell me more. So what is that experience like?
Because I can do the right thing every single day. Every case that I have, I can do what I think is the right thing for a family. And I think that or a child, and that is, incredibly, it's just humbling. It's a humbling experience. Yeah. So, and I have control. So I think that's where I feel safest.
Nice. Is there a situation, and if so, what is it, where you walk into with trepidation?
Public speaking.
Really?
Yes, I do not like public speaking.
And you do it every day.
I do it every day.
You have to bring people into your courtroom and do your speeches from there.
Yes.
Well, here's what we should do. So on your bike trip, you should do some public speaking in every city that you all stop in along the way.
No.
You're like, focus on one thing at a time. Well, as you are traveling cross country and you hit, an amazing market with fantastic restaurants and you have reservations for 5, who are 4 other people that you would invite to dinner with you?
Well, I've got Barack Obama sitting right above me. So Barack Obama, I would invite, that's a great question. I think I would actually invite Eleanor Roosevelt. There's so many different facets to what she did for our country that I think to this day, no one really knows. I would also invite someone new to the table, Polly Murray, who was a woman who was at Howard and Columbia and a lot of different places as a lawyer. She is widely now known to have essentially authored some of our greatest constitutional privacy rights theories for the women's movement and for the civil rights movement, and should have argued maybe the Brown versus Board of Education, but was not given the opportunity to. Wow. And so I would invite her because I think she's just an absolutely fascinating legal giant that not a lot of people know about. And then I have 4. I have one more person.
One more.
Oh, one more person. All right, Denzel Washington, only because, to this day, he's so good looking, really. Yeah. And so I would invite Denzel Washington to the table as well.
Nice. All right. So Holly, Denzel, Eleanor, and Barack. That's an amazing dinner. Let me know when and where you have reservations. I'm going to try to get the table next to you and eavesdrop on that conversation for sure. Monica, a couple more questions. What's one bit of advice that you received at some point on your journey that to this day still resonates with you?
It was when I became a judge, and it was, you are no longer part of the process, you're responsible for the process. And by that, they meant, the system, again, the system of justice as we know it is imperfect, but it's the best we have, and certainly I think the best in the world. And so when that person comes to your courtroom, you are that face, and you are responsible for the process and their satisfaction, and ultimately whether or not they have buy-in and comply with whatever orders you're going to give. So I think that was probably the best piece of advice that I received, and something that really to this day resonates with me.
Cal or Stanford in the big game next year?
What? I'm going to go with Cal, even though, we win 25% of the time. So hopefully, it'll be our house. So hopefully we'll be able to win that game. But, the Cal-Stanford rivalry, I never bought into it.
Same here.
When we were like, 10% body fat playing basketball, I never bought into it. But as soon as I left, all of a sudden it became so much more important to me. And really? So it did. I don't know why. So to this day, I've got a couple of, Stanford, as you know, some Stanford friends. And I just can't help but every time Stanford loses in something, I'll send them a text or an email. When the girls lost the tournament in the tournament last year, I sent them. I'm a terrible person. But yeah, no, it now has become very important.
Well, you took the words right out of my mouth. I wasn't going to use those particular words about being a terrible person, but being on the other side of those texts of rubbing it in have been painful. But yeah, it's interesting. The further I get from it, the more I'm like Pac-12 over anything else. Right? Is so cheering on some of the Cal Golden Bears, and of course, there's a Stanford Cardinal leading the Cal women's basketball team. So infusing a little bit of championship spirit there for you guys as well. Well, Monica,
what doing a great job. Sharman is doing a great job.
Good people, for sure. Is there anything else that you'd love our listeners to know about you, what you're working on, or what's important to you?
I would stress 2 things. If you have an opportunity, there are so many of our, particularly marginalized young people that are in the system, either in the juvenile dependency system or the juvenile justice system. If you have an opportunity to become a foster parent, please look into that. If you have an opportunity to become a CASA, which is a court-appointed special advocate, it's someone who develops a relationship with a young person and then will report to the court. Those are some critical things I think that we as people in our community can do to ensure that people who are unfortunately are in the dependency and juvenile justice systems, that they have an opportunity once they get out of those systems to do something productive in society. So if you have some time, if you're retired, if you have some time, that you can devote to that, then I would urge everyone to kind of look into even just Big Brother, Big Sister program, CASAs, anything that you can spend some time role modeling and mentoring a young person so that they have some consistency in their life. I would ask your listeners to think about doing.
So powerful. Such a great thing to end our conversation with, and an illustration of why representation matters, because I guarantee you in the 100 and something year history of someone being in your position, we didn't have a lot of folks saying this and understanding how important it was for people to find a way to support those in the system, right? That don't have the opportunities or the access to mentors or someone who cares about them, to get them off the street, to give them a warm meal, to care and to love them and to tell them that they are somebody. And so we're going to make sure that we include some information about CASA in our show notes so that those of you that are listening who are able and willing take Monica up on her recommendation. But thank you for that, Monica, and thank you so much for joining us on Unlocking the Club. It has been an honor and a pleasure talking to you. Look forward to hearing all about your coast-to-coast bike ride and all the other great things that you continue to do. And so appreciative of the fact that you are on the bench in San Francisco.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. All right. That was another episode of Unlocking the Club. Again, so thankful for our special guest today, the Honorable Monica F. Wiley. Thanks to all of you for tuning in today. I'm your host, Angela Taylor, and we look forward to seeing you and talking to you and sharing some amazing stories in our next episode of Unlocking the Club. Take care.
Thanks for listening to Unlocking the Club. If this conversation resonated with you, subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or your favorite streaming platform so that you can experience every episode. And follow us on social media, where you'll hear about future guests, access special features, and connect with this amazing community. Head on over there and let us know how you are unlocking the club. Until next time, peace.